The first thing the men saw was a child on the roof of the bunkhouse, beating its sparks with a wet horse blanket while the night wind drove fire across the yard. She was small enough that any sensible person would have been hauling her down by the ankles, but no one could get near the ladder. Flames had already eaten halfway through the hay shed beside it, and every time the rafters groaned, the horses in the lower corral slammed themselves harder against the rails. The girl did not look down. She crawled straight into the smoke, coughing, blind with it, and kept beating the sparks before they could jump the gap and carry the whole ranch with them. That was how Eli Mercer first laid eyes on her. Not as a waif, not as trouble, not as something left behind by hard times. He saw a pair of bare feet blackened with soot, a thin braid come loose in the wind, and a child fighting fire like she had already decided her life was worth spending if it bought a few more minutes for somebody else. Before we go any further, settle in wherever you are tonight and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. It does a lonely story good to know how many good souls are gathered around the fire. Then Eli ran straight into the blaze. He hit the water barrel once, twice, filled a bucket that felt too small for the work at hand, and threw it at the ladder just as a beam crashed through the side of the hay shed. The heat bit his face so hard it felt like the skin had tightened over his skull. "Girl," he roared. She turned at last. Even from the ground, he could see the terrible choice on her face. Behind her, the bunkhouse roof was beginning to catch at the ridge. Below her, the ladder was gone, the side of the shed a wall of orange. And somewhere beyond the smoke, one horse screamed in a way that made every man in the yard go cold. The girl pointed, not at herself, but at the stable. Only then did Eli understand. The fire had started in the hay. The wind had carried it toward the stable. If the sparks crossed to that dry roof, 20 horses would roast alive in their stalls. The child on the roof had seen it before any grown man had. Eli wrapped his bandana over his mouth and ran for the stable doors. He heard somebody grab at his arm and curse him for a fool, but he shook free. He had buried a wife 5 winters ago because he arrived 3 minutes too late with a doctor who had stopped to water his horse. Since then he had lived with the knowledge that there were delays a man could survive and delays he never truly came back from. He did not delay now. Inside the stable the smoke hung low and mean. Horses kicked their boards and rolled their eyes white. Eli moved stall to stall, fingers clumsy on latches, voice low as he soothed them. He had always been better with frightened creatures than with people. One mare sliced his forearm open. He freed her, then the next, then the next. At the last stall he found the door jammed and a big roan gelding rearing against it in terror. He broke it loose just enough, and the horse surged out, clipping him hard in the hip. The roof above him snapped. He looked up into a rain of sparks and knew, with the bleak calm that sometimes comes before dying, that he had misjudged the time. The far aisle was already burning. The front doors looked very far away. He pushed to his feet, staggered once, and then a shape came out of the smoke at the back of the stable where no shape ought to have been. The girl had found a way in through the tack room window. She carried a hooked pole twice her height. Without a word, she jammed it into the burning strap of a fallen lantern chain that had swung loose across the aisle. She yanked it down, clearing the path he could not cross. Her face was streaked black, eyes streaming, but her hands were steady. "Move," she shouted. Eli moved. They ran together through heat and smoke. Eli bent nearly double, the girl behind him with one hand shoved hard into the middle of his back when he stumbled. They burst through the stable doors as the loft went up in a single roar. The yard erupted with men grabbing horses, women hauling water, and one old hand crossing himself with the same filthy fingers he had used to castrate calves for 30 years. Eli got 3 breaths of night air before his knees quit. He hit the dirt hard. The girl was coughing nearby, but when someone reached for her, she crawled back to him instead. "Don't you sleep," she said. "Not after all that. You hear me." He heard her above the whole burning world. By dawn the bunkhouse was half gone, the hay shed was ash, and the stable stood blackened but upright. The girl sat alone on an overturned trough with a blanket around her shoulders and ash in the lines of her palms. No one seemed to know what to do with her. She was maybe 11, maybe 12 if hard living had kept her small. Her dress had once been blue. Her boots did not match. Eli lowered himself onto the trough beside her. Morning had come sharp and cold after the heat, and the smoke drifting from the ruins smelled wet and bitter. "You got a name?" he asked. She studied him first. as if deciding whether names were safe things to hand out. "Junie," she said. "Juniper Bell. You belong to anybody around here, Juniper Bell?" Her chin lifted a fraction. "No, sir." There were answers buried in that no. Too many of them. He nodded toward the yard. "Who told you to get on that roof?" "No one." "Who told you to come back into the stable?" "No one." She pulled the blanket tighter. "You were taking too long." That nearly made him laugh, though it hurt to do it. Instead, he coughed and held a hand against his ribs until the fit passed. "Where'd you come from?" "Road." "Where were you headed?" "Away." That was the first sign of spirit he'd seen that was not bound up in danger. It pleased him more than it should have. Mrs. Haskell came from the cookhouse carrying coffee that smelled burned and heaven sent at the same time. She handed Eli a mug, then crouched before the girl. "There's biscuits inside if you've got the stomach." Junie looked to Eli first. That did something strange to him. Nobody had looked to him first in a long while unless it was for wages or orders. "Go on," he said. She followed Mrs. Haskell 2 steps, then turned back. The little sorrel cut his shoulder on the latch. "He'll need washing before it seals dirt inside." Eli blinked. "You saw that?" "I see most things." Then she vanished into the cookhouse, and Eli sat with his coffee cooling in his hands while men moved around the yard pretending not to stare. The child had saved the horses. The child had gone back for him. Now came the hard part, deciding what ought to happen to her. By noon, he had the answer to part of it. Clem Dorgan rode in with 2 deputies. He owned the largest spread for 50 miles, 3 freight contracts, the mercantile in town, and, according to rumor, half the sheriff's spine. He smiled the way some men checked a fence line, only to see where they might step through later. He dismounted before the porch, brushed trailed dust from his cuffs, and let his gaze travel over the burned shed, the ruined roofline, and finally the child standing in Eli's doorway with a plate in her hands. There was nothing hurried in the way his attention settled on her. That was what made Eli rise. "Mercer," Dorgan said pleasantly. "Heard you'd had yourself a lively night." "Fire'll do that." Dorgan nodded toward Junie. "And what wandered up out of it?" Junie stiffened. Eli felt it from 10 feet away. "A girl," he said. "Has a name and ears both." The smile thinned but held. "That's so? Well, girl like that might be the very one folks in Benton Crossing have been looking for. Word is Reverend Pike's orphan home lost a child yesterday. Little thief. Mean as a kicked mule. Dangerous, if stories are true. Set a mattress alight, trying to cover her tracks." Junie's fingers tightened so hard around the plate, Eli thought it might crack. There it was, the point of no return. He could hand her over and keep the peace, or ask why a child who'd risked her skin for strangers looked ready to fight at the mention of going back. Eli set down his coffee. "Stories are funny things," he said. "Some are true. Some are bought." Dorgan's eyes cooled. "You implying something?" "I'm saying the girl stays put till I hear her tell it." And in the sudden hush that followed, the world changed again. Junie told it in pieces. Reverend Pike's home in Benton Crossing was called Mercy House by the painted sign over the porch. The children called it the quiet place. Pike took in children nobody was protecting and hired them out under the language of charity. "He says work scours sin off a child," Junie said, staring at the porch boards as if the grain in them were easier to face than Eli's eyes. "But it mostly just scours skin." She had gone into Pike's office to return a key she'd stolen for another girl who needed salve from the pantry. There she saw Dorgan beside an open ledger full of children's names, prices, and destinations. When the men turned toward a wagon outside, she tore out one page and hid it in her dress. Later, Pike discovered it missing. In the chase that followed, a lamp overturned in the dormitory. Junie swore she smothered it before it took more than a corner of straw. Pike told the deputies she meant to burn the place down. "And the page?" Eli asked. Junie touched the hem of her dress. He sat back in his chair while the ordinary sound of hammers outside made the ugly story feel even uglier. "If that page says what I think it says," Mrs. Haskell murmured, "Pike and Dorgan have got themselves a trade in children." Junie said nothing, but she didn't need to. Eli had known Dorgan was greedy. He had not known the rot went so deep. The deputies left empty-handed after Eli told them the girl would remain under his protection until the sheriff himself came with proper cause. Dorgan took his time mounting up. Before he turned his horse, he said, almost lazily, "Careful what burden you saddle yourself with, Mercer. Some things follow a stray child." Junie waited until he was out of sight before she breathed again. That evening Eli found her in the ruined yard, crouched beside the injured sorrel with a basin of warm water and a rag. The horse flinched once, then stilled under her hand. "You do know horses," he said. She kept cleaning the cut. "I know scared things. They make sense to me." He leaned on the rail. "You planning to run if I fall asleep?" "Was planning to wait till you were breathing easier." She wrung out the rag. "Running's harder when you owe somebody." That line lodged in him. He had lived 5 years as if owing the dead was the same as belonging among them. Now here was a child in scorched boots speaking of debt as if it might be paid forward instead of down. "I'm riding to town at first light," he said. "You can come with me, or stay here with Mrs. Haskell while I talk to the judge and the sheriff." Her chin came up. "If you go without me, they'll say I wasn't real." He nodded once. "Then you come. And if you'd been in his place, with a powerful man against you and a child you hardly knew depending on your word, would you have trusted her story enough to stake your own name on it?" Eli did not know if he was brave or merely tired of living in ways that left him ashamed. Sometimes the difference was smaller than folks liked to pretend. They left before sunrise. Junie perched beside him in one of Mae Mercer's old brown coats. Eli had not touched the coat chest in years. Benton Crossing was already awake when they rolled in. Wagons clogged the street. A farrier's hammer rang from the smithy. Someone was frying onions somewhere close enough to make the whole town smell hungry. Junie drew in on herself at the sight of Reverend Pike standing on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office. He was a narrow man with a polished voice and hands too soft for any labor he praised in others. Beside him stood Sheriff Beale, who kept one thumb hooked in his belt as if it had to stop him drifting sideways. Dorgan leaned against the hitch rail, hat tipped back, perfectly at ease. "There she is," Pike said, as if greeting a niece at supper. "Juniper, child, you have caused a world of distress." Junie pressed closer to Eli's side, without seeming to move at all. Eli stepped down from the wagon. "Morning. Judge Bellamy in." Beale frowned. "What's this about?" "Family business." Eli's voice came out flatter than he felt. "Mine, if the judge allows it." Dorgan's eyes sharpened. Pike smiled wider, but only with his mouth. Judge Bellamy kept chambers above the mercantile. He was near 70, bent in the shoulders, and still had the kind of face babies trusted and scoundrels did not. He listened while Eli laid out the night's events and Junie, after one glance at the judge's wife by the stove, laid out the rest. She showed them the ledger page. Names, ages, destinations, figures paid, notes in Pike's slanted hand. Strong back, quiet, won't be missed. Tell mother he took fever. Bellamy removed his spectacles, then put them back on as if hoping the words might alter if viewed twice. "Sheriff Beale will want this page," he said carefully. "Sheriff Beale drinks Dorgan's whiskey and cashes Dorgan's favors," Eli replied. "With respect, Your Honor, I'd sooner put a fox over my henhouse." Bellamy looked at his wife. Mrs. Bellamy set down her sewing. "Adoption papers first," she said. "Evidence second. If the child belongs to Mr. Mercer by law, they cannot drag her back to Pike's house while the matter is examined." It was Junie who stared then, not Eli. The judge folded his hands. "Mr. Mercer, is that your intention?" Eli had thought all morning of halfway measures. Then he looked at the child in Mae's coat and knew there was no honest one. "Yes," he said, "it is, if she'll have it." Junie did not speak. Her mouth trembled once, angrily, as if she resented the betrayal. Then she nodded so hard the loose end of her braid struck her shoulder. The adoption was as plain as a prayer and twice as binding. Questions. Signatures. Bellamy's seal. Eli writing his full name in slow strokes because his fingers had begun to shake. Junie printing hers beneath it with fierce care. By the time they came downstairs, she was his daughter in the eyes of the territory, the court, and, though neither said it aloud yet, something older and stricter than either. Pike intercepted them on the landing. "This is irregular," he snapped, the polish gone. "She is a ward under church protection." "No," said Bellamy from above. His voice was old, but it carried. "She is Juniper Mercer. If you wish to contest that, do so before the territorial court and with a clean ledger in your hand." For the first time, Pike looked afraid. That should have been the victory. It was only the beginning. They did not make it a mile out of town before Junie said, very quietly, "We're being followed." Eli did not turn. "How many?" "3 riders." One's the deputy with the red scarf. Once it's crooked, like his left knee don't bend right. That's Mr. Pike's driver. Eli drew the wagon off toward Cottonwood Wash instead of the main road home. The wash ran narrow between clay banks and scrub, with only 2 decent exits for a wagon. He had trapped cattle there in spring floods and knew every bend of it. "Listen to me," he said. "If it comes bad, you keep low till I tell you different." Junie's hand vanished into her coat pocket and came out holding the little iron tack hook she'd used in the fire. He almost told her to put it away. Then he remembered the stable. "Stay where I can see you," he said instead. The first shot struck the back rail of the wagon and blew splinters into the air. Eli whipped the team hard left into the wash. Clay sprayed from the wheels. Behind them, men yelled. Another shot cracked past his ear. He hauled on the reins, set the horses into the narrowest stretch, and jumped down while the wagon still jolted forward. "Under the seat," he barked. Junie vanished. The riders came in fast. Eli cut the traces on the near horse and slapped it loose. The wagon slewed sideways in the wash, blocking half the channel. One rider hit the wheel and went down. Eli fired once, then again. Junie rose from beneath the bench long enough to hurl the tack hook into another horse's bridle. The animal reared, its rider pitched, and Eli dragged him into the dirt. A gunshot punched fire through Eli's side. The world flashed white. He drove his elbow into the fallen rider's throat and rolled for the wagon wheel as another shot cracked past. "Pa!" Junie screamed. The word hit harder than the bullet. He looked up and saw the crooked rider climbing down the bank toward her with murder plain in his face. Eli shoved to his feet, one hand clamped against the warmth spilling through his shirt, and knew he would not reach her in time. Junie did not run. She snatched the ledger page from inside her dress and held it over the deputy's dropped pistol lying in the clay below. "One spark," she shouted, voice ragged and wild. "And every name Dorgan paid for turns to smoke." The men froze. That page was worth more to them than the child. More than Eli. Proof always was. Bootsteps slid on the bank above. Dorgan himself appeared at the rim of the wash, having ridden hard enough to foam his horse. He took in the blocked wagon, the wounded deputy, Eli bleeding in the clay, and Junie holding the page over the pistol barrel. His face changed very little. Only his eyes emptied. "Give it here," he said. Junie looked up at him through soot-dark lashes. "No, sir. You have no notion what you're meddling in." "I know enough." Dorgan drew his revolver. Eli tried to rise, and Junie, with the page fluttering in one hand and the pistol at her feet, stood alone in the wash with a rich man's gun pointed straight at her heart. Dorgan should never have let her learn the value of a page. Junie lifted her chin and began to read. Not quickly, clearly. One name, then another. Ages, places, prices. The red scarf deputy went pale at the third. It was his sister's boy. Dorgan cursed and swung the revolver toward Eli. Eli fired first. The shot broke Dorgan's wrist and sent the gun spinning into the clay. After that, the fight ran out of the wash like water through a crack. The deputy dropped his weapon. The crooked rider tried to scramble for the bank, and Junie struck his knuckles with the tack hook so hard he yelped and fell back cursing. Eli, shaking now from blood loss, got enough rope around Dorgan's good arm to make the rest possible. By the time they reached Judge Bellamy's office again, Eli's shirt was stiff with blood, and Junie would not leave his side. One look at Dorgan and wagon rope, and the judge sent for the territorial marshal by wire. Pike tried to flee before dusk and was caught behind the livery with church cash and children's letters never mailed. The rest came hard and fast. Dorgan's north camp was searched. 3 children and 2 half-grown boys were found there. Pike's cellar turned up ledgers enough to damn them both twice over. Sheriff Beale gave up his badge. Dorgan lost the mercantile, the freight contracts, the north pasture, and then his freedom. Court-ordered sales set money aside for every child named in the books, and Mercy House was closed for good. That night, back at the ranch, Junie stood on a chair beside Eli's bed and changed the bandage on his side while the lamplight shook softly against the walls. Outside, the rebuilt corral creaked, and somewhere in the dark the little sorrel thumped a hoof in his stall as if counting them both among the living. Eli watched Junie's small, careful hands. "May wanted children," he said. "I kept thinking the Lord had settled against me." Junie tied the knot and frowned at her work to make sure it would hold. Maybe he was just taking the long road. He swallowed once. You call me Pa in the wash. She kept her eyes on the bandage. I know. You sorry for it. At that she finally looked up. All the fierceness in her face went young at once. No, sir. I was sorry before. He put his rough hand over her soot-scrubbed one. It was the first time in years he had touched another human being without bracing for grief. A home, she said quietly, ain't the place that keeps you quiet. It's the place that lets you be heard. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who it was meant for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep bringing these quiet reckonings to the fire. In the weeks that followed, the ranch changed first in practical ways. The bunkhouse roof was replaced. The sorrel healed. Mrs. Haskell moved Junie's cot into the little room off Eli's own. Junie learned which boards on the porch sang under boots, which mare stole apples from pockets, and how Eli liked his coffee strong enough to float a nail. Then the deeper changes came. Men took off their hats when Junie passed, and meant it kindly. Eli laughed sometimes without looking startled afterward. On Sundays, Judge and Mrs. Bellamy drove out with seed cakes and news of children placed with decent families because the court would no longer look away. By summer's edge, she was riding fence with Eli at dusk, her braid longer, her back easy at last. The lost don't stop being lost all at once. Sometimes they just hear their name spoken kindly enough to turn around. And when the light went honey gold over the pasture, father and daughter sat their horses at the gate while the healed sorrel grazed below them, and the whole valley looked like it had finally made room for both of them. Next time, stay with me for the story of a deaf seamstress left at a snowbound stage stop with a debt she did not owe, and the one-armed ranch cook who was the first man alive to understand every word she never said.